Dhamma greetings and welcome to everyone joining us today for our first Zen session from the Dhamma Center. Today we have with us Dr. Udayan Chakrabarti. Dr. Chakrabarti is a consultant psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst who has been working for the NHS for the past 30 years. He trained in medicine at Oxford University and further trained in psychiatry in London University. Dr. Chakrabarti has been a Zen Buddhist or has been practicing Zen Buddhism for about 25 years. And his teacher has been the most remarkable master, Venerable Miyokuni from the Shobohan Center in London. Dr. Chakrabarti served in the Buddhist Society Council in London for about 10 years. He was vice chairman for 4 years and assistant editor of the famous Buddhist journal, The Middle Way, later on. Having many of his articles and talks also published, and some of which are available on the Dhamma Center website. So also I must mention that Dr. Chakrabarti is also one of the trustees of the Dhamma Center. And we are very honored that he accepted our request to speak to all of you and introduce the Zen practice and thought today. Thank you, Dr. Chakrabarti. Over to you.
Thank you, Venerable Panavamsa. Thank you very much for inviting me to this talk and also for your lovely introduction. Yes, and good afternoon to all you ladies and gentlemen. I believe some of you are tuning in from outside Britain. Welcome to you all. It's nice to see so many friends in the Dharma. Yes, so welcome. And as Venerable Bhanavamsa has just mentioned, this is the first of our monthly Zen talks. A bit of introduction. There's a lot of Zen everywhere nowadays. You know, wherever you go, you hear this word Zen, and obviously there's quite a lot of misunderstandings about it as well. So in this talk, this is an introduction. I'm assuming that people may have no or very little knowledge of what Zen entails. I'm also assuming that people here today, they have some understanding of Buddhism, whatever their particular tradition may be. Okay. So a little bit of the introduction and what were the defining moments or movements of Zen, so to speak, what makes it stand out separate to other schools of Buddhism. And later on, I will touch on the practice as well. The practice is the same pretty much in all traditions, but of course, different traditions have different emphases and different styles of presentation. So, and there'll be a few training stories because as in all traditions of Buddhism, training stories, parables are very, very important, and they quite often cut to the heart of the matter rather than sort of philosophical issues. The first thing is Zen is a school of Buddhism. A lot of speakers and a lot of literature that one might see, particularly in the West, sometimes tends to almost dissociate Zen from the fact that it is a school of Buddhism. And my teacher, the Venerable Miyokuni, was very much at pains to point out that Zen is not anything without fundamental mainstream Buddhism, which actually includes Theravada Buddhism. And there is a lot of talk in the West, certainly in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, when Zen was being propagated to the West. And one of the key proponents of that was a famous Japanese scholar, monk. Well, he was a monk initially, but he wasn't for the rest of his life, a famous person called D.T. Suzuki. And he had this kind of stance on Zen being very anti-intellectual and sold out. I'll come back to that and touch on that later. But suffice it to say, there's been a lot of misunderstandings. And I think in the 60s, particularly in America, there was a movement called Beat Zen or Hippie Zen, and it was misunderstood. And as is with Buddhism, I think sometimes in the West, who does not have a cultural framework and 2,500 of history, we can get the message wrong. So where does Zen origin? Where does it come from? Well, there is at the root of it, there is a famous incident during the time of the Buddha. Obviously, it has to relate back to the Lord Buddha. And the story goes, now whether this is true or not, the scholars are at pains about it, and that's what scholars do. They look at the historical authenticity of it. But of course, for sincere practitioners, the history isn't as important as the message behind the tale. So the story goes that once Lord Buddha was at Rajagriha in northern India, and he was about to give a talk, and a famous king, the king of Benares, had invited him to talk and gave him a golden flower. And in that assembly, there were hundreds of monks, it says, thousands of lay practitioners, the townspeople, everybody and anybody was present in that talk. And the Buddha was given this flower as an offering with a view to starting his talk. And he simply looked at the flower and he said nothing. He twirled the flower and everybody was obviously stunned silence. And people were obviously expecting him to give a talk, and he didn't. He just remained silent. And at that moment, in the audience was the Venerable Mahakashyapa, who was one of the Buddha's most senior monks, who was reputed to be a fierce ascetic, and he did a lot of meditation. And he suddenly had a little smile. He burst into this subtle smile, which was noticed by the Buddha. And at that point, the Buddha mentions, now I have the treasury of the Dharma. I have the eye of the golden law, and I now pass it to you, O Mahakashyapa. And that is, in essence, the origin of Zen. There was no preaching, there was no talking, but silently the transmission had been made. So Buddha twirls the flower, Mahakashyapa smiles, and Buddha then says, now I pass on to you the treasury of the law, the golden law, the wonderful Dharma, sublime and perfect. I pass it all on to you. And since then, the Zen tradition has an unbroken lineage of master passing on, transmitting directly to disciple. And in recognition of this direct transmission, there is also a gatha. You know, Buddhism is full of these gathas, little quatrains, verses, quite often in the Zen tradition and in the early Buddhist tradition as well. Whenever one developed insight, one expressed that in some form of a terse, small verse, which expressed one's insight. So rather than going into a chapter and books of philosophy and doctrine and metaphysics, in a simple little verse was revealed one's understanding, and it cuts to the chase, so to speak. And this verse says, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not depending on words and letters, direct pointing to the heart, realizing it and becoming Buddha. That is the essence of the Zen school. A special transmission outside the scriptures, not depending on words and letters, direct pointing to the human heart, realizing it and becoming Buddha. There's a background to this verse. So if we look at how Buddhism spread, obviously it started in northern India, and gradually in the next few centuries, it went to the immediate surrounding countries, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Nepal, Tibet, and then to China, and then beyond China to Korea, Japan, and beyond Burma, Thailand, it went to Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, and then 2,500 years later, it has now come to the West. Obviously, when a new religion, a well-traveled religion like Buddhism, when it goes to different countries, one of the beauties of Buddhism is it doesn't negate the prevailing culture and ways of the prevailing people in the new land. It doesn't shut it all out. It works with the prevailing systems. It quite often modifies the prevailing systems, and sometimes it takes on board what is already there in the native culture where it has spread to. So we know that there are two main strands within Buddhism. Buddhism went to the northern countries. We call it the Northern or Mahayana School of Buddhism. And then it also went to the southeast countries, southern countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand. And we call that the Theravada school, because that happens to be the school of the elders. That's the oldest. The Theravada school is the way of the elders. And then you have the Mahayana school, which Mahayana school basically has two main extant branches. It's the Zen school and the Tibetan Buddhist school. There's also one or two other schools. There's the Pure Land school. They're sort of more in the minority. That's again in the Far East, mainly in Japan nowadays. So we have these three main divisions of the Buddhist traditions. That we have the Theravada school, which is predominantly in the South and Southeast Asian countries, and the Northern school, which is split into the Tibetans and the Buddhists and the Zen Buddhists. So when Buddhism first went to China, which is possibly the first, I mean, we already had the Silk Road, the trade routes, and Buddhism spread along the Silk Road. So when we first had the early Buddhism going to China, which would have been about 2 or 3 centuries after the Buddha's passing, Buddhism had changed, I suppose, from the very early prototype Buddhism, some of which is still preserved in the Theravada Pali Canon. New schools arose. Naturally, the master was no longer there anymore. Things hadn't been written down until the council 100 years after the Buddha's passing. So of course, there were lots of different interpretations, and so it is today. The same line that you read can have different interpretations from people to people. And the same person. I remember reading certain things 25, 30 odd years ago, and the interpretation or whatever message I read from that line 30 years ago is not the same as it is now. So you can understand how these developments happen and why they happen, because we need to interpret the doctrine. But there is a sticking point. In this interpretation of the doctrine, we start arguing with each other. No, this is what he meant. No, I'm telling you, actually, this is what he really meant. And so hence you have all these different schools. And actually within 200 years after the Buddha's passing, there were at least 20, 25 schools. And these schools gradually sort of coalesced into 2 big groupings, the so-called Theravada grouping and the so-called Mahayana groupings. And within that, there were new scriptures coming, lots of new scriptures. A lot of the sort of Mahayana sutras, they would have started, say, 200 years after the Buddha's passing until another 500, 600 years. And clearly there were differences of opinion. So when Buddhism went to China and started taking hold there, which would have been, say, by 400 years after, so about the time of the Common Era, 400 years after the passing of the Buddha, there was predominantly an Indian form of Buddhism in China. And this Buddhism was quite philosophical, metaphysical, and it was quite confusing to the native Chinese because lots of new sutras were being translated, yearly. And the Chinese monks and missionaries were very keen to get all these sutras and holy scriptures from India and translating them. And there were some famous Buddhist masters of Indian origin and some from the Central Asian region, what would current day be, I suppose, Kazakhstan and all those areas. There was a massive amount of interest and development, and there was also quite a bit of confusion because obviously there was all these new doctrines and scriptures and new masters coming. And so you can understand that people in China weren't quite sure what was happening. Then, of course, they had their native Taoism and Confucianism. And some of the early Buddhist masters, before they became Buddhist, they were well versed in Confucianism and Taoism. And some of that kind of intermingled with some of the principles of Buddhism. But basically, in the sort of first, second, third centuries of the Common Era, Buddhism in China became quite metaphysical. It was practiced by the elite aristocracy. It was quite an intellectual thing. And it seemed as if at times the essence, the early message of the Buddha was lost in the process, as always happens with cultural accretions. And so next we have another very seminal figure in the history of Zen Buddhism, and his name is Bodhidharma. I'll come to Bodhidharma in a very, very short while. It is important to know about him. But first, this origin of the word Zen. Where does it come from? Well, Zen is a transliteration of the Chinese word Shan, and Shan is a transliteration of the Sanskrit word dhyana. Dhyana means meditation. The Sanskrit word is dhyana. So dhyana became Chan, became Zen. That's all. So in effect, the Zen school can be almost referred to, and sometimes has been referred to, as the meditational school of Zen. Although my teacher was at pains to point out that Zen isn't just about meditation. It isn't just about sitting all day meditating and thinking that's Zen. Clearly not. Zen is very similar to other schools of Buddhism where, of course, meditation plays a big part, but it is not the only thing. There's also something called daily life practice, which I'll touch on a bit later on. So that's the origin of the word Zen. And that gives a pointer that actually there's a lot of sitting and clearing one's own heart, so to speak, this heart that contains all the qualities of being human, some of them noble, some of them not so noble. It comes to dealing with all that, recognizing all that. And that very first verse I mentioned, this way is a special transmission outside the scriptures, not depending on words and letters. Well, if you look into the annals of Zen, you'll actually find that the Zen masters have probably written more than anybody else. So whilst they say it doesn't depend on scriptures and letters, and it doesn't rely on doctrine, that is absolutely not true. They themselves have written loads and commented loads. The point being that Buddhism is a perfect synthesis of both study and practice. Study and practice must match each other. Because if practice is just my practice, and some of the people nowadays, especially in the West, they do practice without a master or a teacher. A lot of it is done alone, looking up a few sessions on Google or reading a few books here and there. It's not done the traditional way. Traditionally in the East, a serious student of Buddhism, whatever the tradition, would be enrolled with a master, direct guidance, almost on a daily basis. So therefore, it is actually important to read the scriptures. And the Zen masters, all of them, invariably, most of them, were very versed actually in all the scriptures, including the whole canon of the Pali Theravada canon and their talks. If one reads their talks and discourses, it is quite obvious they were incredibly well versed in the early scriptures and the Mahayana scriptures. And a good Zen student has to read the whole lot. So just because one is Zen doesn't mean we ignore the Pali canon. That is important because most of the framework of Buddhism is actually included in that original mainstream Indian Buddhism. An example another teacher used to give is the background, the basics, is the root and trunk of a tree, is the Theravada Pali canon, the Indian mainstream Buddhism. The branches are the offshoots of the Mahayana, and perhaps the flowers can be looked at Zen. It's a good way of looking at it. It's a whole combined whole. So although there was a lot of talk in the 60s of Zen being anti-intellectual and Zen just expressing myself as I am, just do it, man, and all that kind of thing. It's quite not the case, because if we just did whatever we wanted to do, I think the world would be in a much more dangerous position. So it isn't just about being myself and when hungry I eat, when tired I sleep. It's not just that. There is actually a lot of study for us to do. But the point in that verse is not to be stuck on words and letters. There are little sticklers who say, thus is said so in the holy book, therefore it must be this. No, the messages in the doctrine are to be interpreted, and it isn't a thou shalt, thou must. It isn't a commandment. Buddhism does not have these commandments. Buddhism has these suggestions that we take voluntarily, and that we take vows to lead up to those standards. But of course, we don't always pull it off. We do end up doing things that perhaps we shouldn't do, but we don't get into a major guilt trip about it and start beating myself up about it. We resolve not to do it again, and we move on. So it's like it's like a human being. We have two legs, don't we? We put one leg in front, and then the other legs comes up, and then alternating. And so it is with study and practice. If we just do study, 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 and there is no practice, well, it all remains in my head, and it's not actually manifesting in my daily life practice. Whereas if we just practice, 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 and we don't do it under the guidance of a teacher, then of course it becomes my practice, and it doesn't tally with what the scriptures say. So it is important. Now, I want to debunk that myth that Zen is very anti-intellectual. Of course, ultimately, the truth is beyond the confines of the intellect, and that is also very significant, but we do have to go through a lot of study and practice before we get to that stage. So back to Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma is traditionally what's called the first patriarch of Zen. So after Buddha, we're talking about 1,000 years after Buddha, Bodhidharma. Now again, the historians and scholars debate whether he was an actual character. Did he actually live? Was it all legend? Was it all myth? But the tradition has been thus handed to us, that Bodhidharma was the 28th Indian patriarch after the Buddha. And the story has it that when he was a young boy, he was about 7 years old, his master came along to his father. Bodhidharma was a young prince in the south of India. And he was obviously a very special, bright young boy with tremendous talent and gifts. Bodhidharma's father was the local sort of small-time king of a local kingdom in the South India. And he was a follower of Bodhidharma's teacher. And Bodhidharma's teacher, and one day the king had offered him a great gift to the master, and the master said, now is not the right time. When the time is right, I shall come to you and I shall extract that gift from you. Well, Bodhidharma was about 7 or 8 years old. The master came back and said to the king, now I have come to take my gift. And when the king asked, and what is it? I can give you whatever it is I want. Bodhidharma said, the master Panyatara, he said, I want your third son. I want Bodhidharma. I want to take him away with me. The king did, and Bodhidharma trained under this master for many years. And then when this master passed on the transmission to him, and traditionally the symbol of the transmission was you pass your robe and bowl, begging bowl, onto your disciple as symbol, as proof of that transmission. So Bodhidharma inherited this robe and bowl, and this is about, I would say, the 5th century AD in India, by which time Buddhism was kind of splitting. There were lots of divisions, there was no unity, and pretty soon after that we obviously had the Islamic invasions, which completely started destroying Buddhism mainly. It somehow couldn't destroy Hinduism, but in the northwestern frontiers of India at that time, what would be modern day Pakistan, Afghanistan, Punjab, that was the heartlands of Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, and it was completely ruthlessly destroyed. So Buddhism was on a wane. It was decaying and dying anyway. It was ossifying. And Hinduism was beginning to make a resurgence under the great Hindu teacher Sri Shankara. So for whatever reason, the historians and scholars write theses on this, but for whatever reason, Bodhidharma decided that he needed to go to China. And so he sailed across from actually South India, took a perilous voyage by sea, going through Malaya, Indonesia, and towards China. And eventually he went there. When he went there, he realized that the state of affairs in Chinese Buddhism, which by that stage had about 400 years, 500 years of exposure to Indian Buddhism, he realized that the heart, the essence of Buddhism was being missed. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a huge intellectual, elite, aristocracy kind of thing. So it was almost a fashionable thing to be into Buddhism. It wasn't the real thing. Although there were some emperors and kings who were devoted, who were building monasteries, who were allowing thousands of monks and nuns, Buddhist monks. And it was quite amazing to think that the Chinese, such a proud nation, they were a very civilized nation for thousands of years. You know, the two great civilizations of the East would be the Yangtze Valley civilization of China and the Indus Valley civilization of India. But yet they accepted Buddhism, and there must have been jolly good reasons for that. So when Bodhidharma went, he was eventually came face to face with the great Emperor Wu of China. And you can imagine how powerful the Chinese emperor was back in those days. One thing you said out of place and off with his head, if you know what I mean. It's, you know, so you were very careful in front of the emperor. So this monk comes, and the Emperor Wu's main Buddhist teacher was a great Mahasattva, a great Buddhist being, and he recognized immediately who Bodhidharma was. But nobody else did. So the emperor has an audience with this great man who has just arrived from India, and word spread like wildfire all over China. A great master has arrived from India, and he brings the essence, the heart of the Buddha's teaching, which has been lost in mistranslation or whatever cultural accretions in China. So there he is, the great Bodhidharma, in front of Emperor Wu, and Emperor Wu says to Bodhidharma, "Thank you for coming to my land. We are so blessed indeed that a great master like you has come all the way from India with all the perilous troubles that involves. We are really blessed and grateful. Now, I have built many monasteries and temples, and as you know, I am a devout Buddhist, and I have allowed many monks and nuns to be ordained, blah, blah, blah. All kinds of things, singing his own praise genuinely. And at the end, he asks the question to the great master, Bodhidharma, "Master, what is my merit in all this?" And obviously, the emperor was expecting something along the lines, "Oh, you've done so well. You have propagated Buddhism. You have accrued great merit." But no, that's not what Bodhidharma said. Bodhidharma said, "No merit whatsoever." You can understand the shock on the emperor's face. What? No merit? Isn't that the first essence of Buddhism? You do good and you get a lot of merit. And by this time, the emperor was getting a bit angry, shall we say. Yeah? The executioners are on his side with their swords, one nod of the head and off with his head. And what did Bodhidharma said? He said, no merit whatsoever. Then he goes, well, I thought that was the first principle of Buddhism. You do good and you acquire merit points. So what is the essence of Buddhism then? And Bodhidharma says, vast emptiness, no holiness. Can you imagine that? Vast emptiness, no holiness. The poor emperor, by this stage, he's really angry. And he said, what do you mean? Vast emptiness, no holiness. Who stands before me? Are you not a holy one? Are you not a monk of the order? And what does Bodhidharma says? When he's asked, who stands before me? Who are you? He simply says, not known. He didn't say, I don't know. Some of the translations say, I don't know. That is not what he said. The Chinese, actually, the original Chinese says, not known. At this, the emperor was obviously furious, but he also recognized there was something special about this man. And rather than ordering his attendants to strike him down, he let him go. And then Bodhidharma went off, and the legend says he went off into the mountains, hid in a monastery, a damaged monastery from centuries ago, and sat facing the wall for 9 years. Well, that's quite a story, isn't it? Vast emptiness, no holiness, in front of the emperor. But there's a lot of truth in that. And, emptiness is something we hear a lot of, either sunyata in the Mahayana school or anatta in the Theravadan school. It's the same thing. What is he trying to point to? So let me just finish off the story, because this is about the fundamentals of the origin of Zen, and it's important to know this. So then Bodhidharma sits there all alone, and after he leaves, the emperor's teacher, he tells the emperor, "Master, did you not recognize who that was? That was the living bodhisattva of compassion who has come to our land to transmit the true essence of the Buddha heart school, and you did not recognize him." So the emperor then sent apparently many messengers after Bodhidharma, but he never turned back, because he realized that though the emperor has done many good deeds, he hasn't grasped the essence of, he hasn't touched on emptiness. And if you are truly empty, you don't have a concept of holy either. The sun shines, the sun just shines. It shines on saints and sinners alike. It doesn't say, "Oh, you're a nice person, I'll give you extra sunshine. Oh, you are a sinner, I'm not going to shine on you." No. If we have these concepts, and one of the great Mahayana sutras, the Prajna Paramita Sutra, Prajna Paramita, Prajna, as you know, in Theravada terms, is panna. Prajna is that supreme wisdom, the transcendental wisdom beyond the mundane, supramundane. So it's also called the supramundane wisdom. That prajna, and paramita means the other shore, that which takes me to the other shore. Here I am on this shore, me, I, and my problems and my issues. Oh, I've got an anger problem. Oh, I'm too greedy. Oh, I wish I could do this. Oh, all those, that's me, I on this shore. And I imagine there is this other shore, the shore of nirvana. And paramita is that which takes me across to the other shore. So the Prajna Paramita Sutras are the highest wisdom sutras in the Mahayana school. And there you go into this dialectic of this no I, anatta and shunyata in lot more detail. And we'll be touching on that in future classes, talks. So Bodhidharma then sits there and he practices alone, and this legend has it that he waits for a long time, and after a couple of years, a Chinese monk comes to know of him and tracks him down. He's heard about this great master who sits all alone. He does not seek any disciples. He does not seek to popularize Buddhism. He just sits there alone in his cave, meditates and waits and waits and waits. And one day, this Chinese monk comes along, who is a very senior monk. He has been training in various Buddhist traditions and Taoist traditions for years, but his heart is not at peace. Though he has read a lot and studied a lot and meditated a lot, he clearly finds that there is something lacking. And isn't that what brings us to the practice, most of us? Don't we find something lacking? I remember in my own case, I was probably about 27 years old, gosh, a long time ago. And, I had a career, I had a lovely family, I had a nice job, I had a nice car, but something was missing. Something was missing. You can't put your finger on it. You kind of wonder, what is it? Wow, that's the longing of the heart. And if we are really honest, we know something is missing. And it isn't all about material success, is it? I mean, some of us might come into the practice because we got a great shock. My partner left me. I was humiliated at work. I was, my boss sacked me. Or I built up that dream business over 20 years, and somehow somebody just walked all over it and smashed it. whatever. Sometimes we get profound shocks in life that makes us question our purpose in life, our meaning in life. And some of us come into Buddhism or spirituality through that route, the shocks and turmoils of samsara that we can bear no longer. But some of us, we don't need such a profound shock. Some of us, we come to the practice because we inherently feel something missing. And if we've had a connection with the Buddha Dharma, perhaps we practiced in former times, former lives, whatever, somehow we seem to have an affinity for this practice, and it seems to be right for us. Whatever the tradition, it doesn't matter. We're different people, but the one thing that unites us Buddhists all is the Buddha. We all believe firmly in the Buddha's enlightenment. And interestingly enough, the Buddha's story resounds with us because he was the great prince who had it all. And yet, he didn't have it all. And he spent all those years doing all those austerities, seeking the way. So we've had those similar problems, which is why it's so important. My teacher, whenever she would give a talk on introductory talk on Buddhism, be it in a summer school or be it in a period of a retreat, the first talk was always about the life of the Buddha, because we need to go back to that again and again and again, because that is also our story. We too have those phases. We are too, when we are young, we are full of it. The world is my oyster and everything is as I see it, as I please it. But then at some time, slowly, usually when we start getting a bit older and the hair turns gray and the wrinkles come under the eyes, by then we start to heed the messengers, don't we? In Buddha's case, the messengers were, of course, a sick man, an ill man, a dead man. You know the story, the holy man. These were the 4 divine messengers that the Buddha. But in our case, we see the messages and messengers all the time. I don't have it my way at work. I don't have it my way at home. The world doesn't run according to my principles. I want to be the hub and center of the universe, but sadly it isn't. And eventually we come out of that childish phase, don't we? I mean, Western psychology also, interestingly enough, goes into similar phases of a human being's development: the childish phase, the adolescent phase, then the young adult phase, then the mature adult phase, and then the seasoned spiritual person's phase. And these are natural growth vectors that if we deny to ourselves, we actually develop the neuroses and the psychoses and the mental illness. And we see that in the West now, don't we? Despite all this material progress and achievement and emancipation, I mean, compared to how people lived 100 years ago, our life should be a lot better. We don't have to do much manual labor. At home, we have the Hoover, the fridge, the washing machine, all this. And guess what? Mental illness is on the rise. I say that as a psychiatrist. I'm seeing 7, 8-year-olds who are now self-harming. It's shocking. What has gone wrong? Well, if we don't heed the message of the heart, which needs to be fulfilled, which needs fulfilling, our destiny is to go this way, then of course we live in a very anti-religious, anti-spiritual age where it's all me, and whatever I want to do, my needs must be satisfied. You better do as I tell you. And of course, we also have some psychologists saying, let it all hang out, let your emotions out, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. It leads us into problems. So there comes this Chinese monk to see Bodhidharma. His name is Huike. That's the Japanese name for him. His Chinese name is different. And he stands outside the cave and he seeks an audience with the great master Bodhidharma, who completely ignores him. And poor Huike stands all through the night, and it starts snowing in the night, and by the early morning he's half covered in snow. And still, with hands joined, he asks the great master, please, master, take pity on me, because my heart is not at peace. I have spent many, many years pursuing this heart, trying to know what it is, but it is not at peace. Then Bodhidharma says, he actually looks at him and acknowledges him. And he says, you of little knowledge, you of little character, you expect to know the Buddha's way? Do you know what the Buddhas and the ancestors did? They gave up their own bodies. They were not even bothered about their own deaths. They went to such extreme lengths. They endured the unendurable for years and years and lifetimes. And you, with your petty knowledge and your shallow, arrogant attitude, you expect to find the Buddha Dharma? Sounds a bit cruel, doesn't it? There is the man waiting in the snow all night, hands joined, and this great master, instead of some compassionate, he has a go at him. He's actually testing his sincerity. And then the legend says that Huike cut off his arm and offered it in sincerity. Now, we've got to be careful when we hear these stories. These stories are clearly allegorical, metaphorical. Having said that, if you look at the ancient Indian scriptures, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, there were such gruesome stories of disciples offering their, an archer, for instance, would offer his right thumb. In the Mahabharata, there's a famous case. So there is a precedent. And there were early ascetic self-mortification practices where, in fact, funnily enough, in the Christian mystical tradition, the Desert Fathers, who were the great Christian mystical deserts, they also indulged in self-mortification and such so-called gruesome activities. But of course, the Buddha was very against all this self-mortification, wasn't he? He did his austerities for 6 years. You know, that famous picture of him when he's reduced to a skeleton and he could hardly breathe when he realized this is the wrong way. Anyway, the legend has it that this Chinese monk hacked off his, they carried a knife with him, we must be very careful not to actually get bogged down with the nitty-gritties and the historical factual accounts. That's what they do with many other doctrinal schools. These are meant to be taken allegorically, the symbolic message behind it. What it really means is that that stage, Huike was prepared to cut a bit of himself off, i.e., he was declutching himself from his baggages, his I, his Atman, that which the Buddha denied as anatta. He was declutching from that. So the legend has it, he did that then. And then Bodhidharma accepted his offering and said to him, bring me your heart and I shall put it at peace. And then by this stage, obviously this Chinese monk had a great, what we call awakening experience, conversion, insight, satori, whatever you call it. And at that stage he said, I cannot find it. I've searched it, but I cannot find it. At that moment, the master said, there, your heart is pacified for good. And truly it was pacified. And then Huike trained with him and stayed with him for many years. And then the legend has it that when Bodhidharma was very old, over 100 years old, he decided to go back to his motherland, India. He made Huike the second patriarch. And before he went, he did a little verse which goes something like this. The beautiful flower of Buddha unfurls itself. 5 petals will unfold, and then the flower will fully bloom. So what happened was, after Bodhidharma, who then became the first patriarch of Shan or Zen in China, because he was not into too many scriptures. He did take one scripture with him, which is reputed to be his preferred scripture. He took what's called the Lankavatara. Lankavatara Sutra is the descent of the sutra into the island of Sri Lanka, as it happens. It's called the Lankavatara Sutra, and which is actually the origin of the Yogacara school, a sophisticated, almost a psychological school of Buddhism. He took that sutra, and apparently he passed the robe, that sutra and the bowl, onto Huike. And after Bodhidharma, there were 4 other great Zen masters, and then the 6th great master was Huineng. So this Bodhidharma's prophecy about 5 petals unfolding and then the flower blooms fully, what that meant was when Huineng came to be, the sixth patriarch of Shan Buddhism. By that time, we entered what's called the golden age of Zen. This happened to coincide with the Tang dynasty of China, which was possibly about 605 AD to 920 AD. So it was a flowering of Buddhism and culture and Zen, and some of the greatest cultural developments, Zen masters, poets, philosophers, artists, painters, came from that period. And by that time, within 100 years after the sixth patriarch, Zen Buddhism was fully established. You also had all the other established schools as well. You had the Vinaya schools, you had the doctrinal schools, you had all the schools that you had in India and say Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, you had them all in China, and soon thereafter it started spreading to Korea and Japan. So there you have quite a few sort of pointers about the origins of it. And I'd just like to finish off a little bit with what the two main pillars are. So as I said in the beginning, the two main pillars are study and practice. Study obviously means studying your teacher's books or the sutras. If you don't understand the sutras, we go to our teacher for guidance, explanation. And practice. What is practice? Well, practice is basically divided into two main domains. One is meditation and the other is daily life practice. Now, most of us, when we come to Buddhism, including myself, we actually think meditation is the most important thing. And in fact, this is what I suppose separates Buddhism from its parent religion, Hinduism. As you know, Buddhism came from Hinduism, and Buddha made some radical revolutionary changes to some of the key concepts of Hinduism. So in Hinduism, Brahmanism at the time, you had this obsession with the Atman. Atman is my individual soul or spirit that reincarnates from life form to life form, and the soul essence remains the same. And to that, the Buddha dramatically, radically said, no, it is no Atman. There is no personal entity that goes from lifetime to lifetime. And there were one or two other radical things he did, obviously. He was also very much against the caste system and all that. So study and practice is very important. In practice, although we like to think meditation is the main thing and all my problems will solve if I meditate, actually it isn't. Meditation is part of the story. Actually, the true message is everything we do in life is meditation. When we eat, when we walk, when we sit, when we put the cup down gently, instead of slamming the door shut, we gently shut the door in awareness, in mindfulness. That is what true meditation is. But of course, it's very difficult to pull it off 24/7 in our busy, stressful lives at work and at home. We get carried away, don't we? Quite often before we came to the practice, we realized that we actually run on autopilot. I remember my own case. I remember I was a heavy smoker in those days, and I'd be in my car, and quite often I would have smoked halfway into the cigarette, and suddenly I realized, oh my God, when did I even light it up? Did I really want it? And then I noticed after a few months of practice that if I'm in a stressful situation, or let's say suddenly I hit a traffic jam, before thinking, my automatic autopilot reaction would be to light up a cigarette. With the practice, I began to see through it. And that's the kind of example I'm giving. We run on autopilot. Half the time we're not sure, we're not aware of what we're doing, and the practice makes us more aware of it. And on that very note, you are well aware of the three fires in Buddhism, aren't you? The three fires being desire, hatred, and delusion. And one of the famous statements of the Buddha is, I do not like it when I'm parted from that which I find pleasant. And equally, I dislike it when I'm conjoined to that which I find unpleasant. So what do? I pick and choose, don't I? I pick the good stuff that I want to do and the bad stuff that I don't want to do. No, it's not for me. So washing the dishes, cleaning the cups, I don't want to do that. That's not for me. I want to meditate and get to those exalted jhanas, as they say in the Theravada tradition, or samadhi. I've heard of these profound words called samadhi and the higher states and the ninth bodhisattva stage and all this. But of course, my daily life, all those little chores, mighty judge that I am, they're below me. The washing. Oh, that phone call I have to make to that stupid friend of mine who's always nagging me for something. Doesn't she realize I haven't got time for her? She never listens to me anyway, but she always expects that blooming phone call, especially on a Saturday afternoon when it's so nice. You know, those little fires all the way, you know? Of course, we're not aware of them because we don't think the Buddha lies in those little fires. We come to the practice thinking, I have a big problem. I have an anger management problem, or I have an addiction, or I have a greed problem, or this or that. But the umpteen little reactions we have in our daily lives, all those negative reactions. The classic example my teacher gives is I walk around the corner, I'm walking around the street, I walk around the corner, you inadvertently a stamp on my toe. Yeah, an accident, I know it. But what happens in that moment? Right at that moment, if I'm fully aware, of course, there's the searing physical pain, right? But there's something else, isn't there? There's a little emotional reaction, a little snorter. He crossed my path. Why couldn't he be careful? It's a funny story about that. A couple, they go to bed and the wife puts a bit of water by the door. The husband gets up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. He should know the glass is there because the wife puts it there by the door every day. But in the dark, he kind of kicks into the glass and he spills water everywhere. First thing he says to the wife, God, why do you have to put the glass of water there? And the first thing the wife shouts back is, and God, can't you look where you're going? Thankfully, the story ended there. It didn't develop into a major feud. But isn't that how things start? A tiny little thing. He hurt me. He didn't listen to me at work or at home. I told her to do this. She didn't do it. And then what happens to us? We start having all these reactions. I remember very recently, actually, just a few weeks ago, somebody was trying to, basically a senior manager was trying to bully me into doing something against my wishes. She had her edict from high above and she was trying to pressurize me and all this. And I was obviously very upset about it and got a bit angry, a bit hot under my collar. And then I realized I was having all these, there was a simple thing to do. I either did what she suggested or I didn't. If I didn't, I could have told her. I chose to do because I suppose she had some sense in what she was suggesting to me. But I didn't want to be disrespectful to her. But I internalized it. And then I sort of went back home, and as I was driving back, my mind was on it. I wasn't actually driving. I could have had an accident. And I was thinking, I should have told her this. Tomorrow I'm going to give her a piece of my mind. Yes. And so there was me rehearsing in my mind all these endless thought streams going on and not being in the present moment. That is not to say that we don't think about things at work or at home. Of course, we have to reflect on things, of course. But it's how it's done. And we know when we are going overboard. We know when we need to cut it out, get back into the here and now. So the daily life practice is giving myself into fully what is right now. So if I'm doing the washing, it's doing the washing. It's not about rehearsing how I'm going to retort to my boss tomorrow. It's not about what the wife told me yesterday and upset me about. No, if I'm washing the cup, it is giving myself into the washing. And which actually means feeling the sensation. So this is the satipatthana, isn't it? When we are meditating, we are aware of the sensations and the feelings that are arising within us. So in this particular case, washing the cup or dishes, feeling the water, the hot or cold water on my hand, the contact with the cup. Yes, if the kitchen window is open, getting that scent of the spring early flowers, being at one, not being closed off. It isn't, something where basically I'm doing something and I'm completely lost in something else. I recognized the value of this, and my teacher's mantra was simply this: I give myself into what is over and over again, into the here and now. What that is, I don't know, because that implies the state of anatta. You can't describe the state of anatta, can you? Because nobody's there to notice it. So if anybody gives a description of anatta and no I smell a rat, because how can you when you're not there? Who is there to observe what is going on? All that you can say is, I was given into washing the cup. And oddly enough, I mention this because that is one of my bugbears. I'm obviously a doctor. I like reading, I like sitting. Sadly, manual labor is not my forte. My teacher, she sussed me out straight away. Right on the early days, she would give me, Udayan, you have to go and clean the toilet. You have to scrub the floors. And funny enough, once I was in not in Shabuan, but in Fairlight, the other training temple we have in Luton, and I was upstairs having to hoover this big room, and my teacher's study was below. And obviously, I didn't want to do it. This is quite a few years ago. Thankfully, I'm not as bad as that nowadays. This is many years ago, and I was hoovering. It was a lovely sunny day like this today, and I really didn't want to do it. It was a big room, and lunch was going to be served in about 15 minutes, and I could smell some lovely food, sort of scents wafting. And so, as I was hoovering, I was doing one part of the room, yeah, and then instead of doing it beautifully, symmetrically all across the room, I'll then go to the other side of the room where the window is, and then I'll stare out of the window. So it was completely haphazard. There was no order, and somebody below can clearly understand what is going on. This guy hasn't put his heart into the work at all. And suddenly, after 10 minutes of this dithering and dibbling on, I could hear this shout, "Oh, Diane! Come down here straight away." So I went down straight away, and she said to me, "You are a doctor. You are supposed to be clever. Can't you even hoover a room? You're going from this end to that end to that end. Then you're stopping for 2 minutes. Don't you think I can see exactly what is going on?" And she was so spot on. She was so spot on. However, when she used to give me a task to edit the journal, we had our own journal. That is my cup of tea. And that, oh, I love that. I was fully given into that. So there is the essence of daily life practice. It is nothing special. She said, just do your daily chores, Udayan. At home, you're a husband and a father. At work, you're a doctor. With your friends, you're friends. With your Dharma brothers and sisters, you're no special airs and graces. And those of us that tried to put it on, we all wanted to be a great Buddhist student, didn't we? We all want to impress our master, don't we? In front of her, we are as good as gold. As soon as we leave her presence, suddenly all my foibles come back to me, don't they? Anyway, so her message was, I'm going to finish very soon. We're coming to the end, so I'll just finish off. So the message was really, give yourself into what is here right now, your normal daily chores. And there lies the essence of the practice. If you don't do that, if I don't do that, and do you know what? The slow dullard that I am, it took me more than 15 years to fully appreciate. Actually, all those little chores and daily duties that I think are beneath me, not worthy of me, because of course I am a meditator, I am the great Buddhist. Me washing the cup, me polishing the floor, me sweeping, that's not me. That's where life is unlived, and all those little resistances, they build up and they build up. That's the unlived life. You can't just have light all the time. It's light and dark. You can't just expect it to be sunny like this all the time. Likewise in meditation, you can't expect your mind to go blank. We're not a dead piece of wood or log. We will have thoughts. We will have fleeting images, but non-judgmentally, we move on and we move on. So we'll come back to that in later talks. There's so much to mention, but basically, I'll finish with a very brief story, which kind of summarizes what the way, that's the Chinese way of saying it, by the way, the way. The Indian way would be dharma, or in Pali it would be dhamma. Dharma is also the way things are. Dharma with a small d is all the elements of dharma, the doctrinal, the phenomena of dharma, which is the philosophical strand of Buddhism. But dharma with a capital D is A, the Buddha's body of teachings, and B, the way of the universe, the way of life, the way, dharma. So this story involves a samurai who for many years was a samurai warrior. And the samurai code is you serve your liege lord and you never desert him. You never. That's the code you've taken. Anyway, this samurai, after 8 years of being a samurai, he was profoundly spiritual and he did not want to become a samurai anymore. He wanted to become a Zen monk. He fought with his conscience for a long time because it was a disgraceful thing for a samurai to do. And if other samurais find out that you have deserted your liege lord, they can actually kill you because loyalty is the greatest asset to a samurai. Anyway, so he decides after many struggles with his conscience, I cannot do this anymore. I want to embrace Buddhism and I want to go to a monastery and train under a master. So one day in the night, he secretly slips out from his lord's castle, goes off into the countryside and trains in a monastery, mountain monastery, for 12 long years. As was the tradition in those days, after you've trained with your root master for a period of years, when the master feels you have done enough training, the master will ask you to go on pilgrimage so that A, you can refine that knowledge and insight in the real world. The monastery is obviously a different kind of world. So in China and Japan and India as well, the Buddha encouraged this. He encouraged his monks to go away into the towns and cities to test that insight, to make sure that insight is more mature and refined. So this ex-samurai, now a monk of many years, he starts out on his pilgrimage and he hadn't actually gone very far from the mountain. He was on a local highway and along comes galloping another samurai. And he recognizes that samurai. Oh my goodness, he's my brother samurai from the same liege lord. And this samurai on horseback, he too recognizes him. And immediately the samurai draws his sword out. The traitor, the scum of the earth, the vile little thing. He disgraced our honor, our code of samurai. And so he takes his sword out and is about to strike him down, this monk, when suddenly he realizes, such vermin, I don't want to sully my noble sword with the blood of this. So instead he spits in his face as he rides past. And what does the monk do? He simply wipes the spittle off his face. And at that moment, he realizes something profound. He realizes what his reaction would have been 12 years ago. Yeah, as a monk, he still had a knife because, you're traveling in the wilderness, you do carry a little knife. He realized what he would have done. If somebody had done 1/100th of that to him, he would have struck that samurai down. But instead, no fires erupting, he recognized what would have happened, and now he simply wipes the spittle of the face and he composes this poem on the spot. He turns towards the mountain monastery, bows deeply 9 times, and he says, "The mountain is the mountain, and the way is the same as of old. Verily, what has changed is my own heart." I'll leave it there for today. Thank you. All right, Bhante.
Thank you, Udayan.
Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask Udayan with regards to Zen Buddhism, Zen practice and thought, or just on anything that Udayan talked about today. Yes, Dil.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chakrabarti, for
Thank
your
you.
talk. I think you gave a talk when Bhante first started these sessions. I think it was you who came and spoke to us, right?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
And I was there, and I like to talk very much.
Oh,
and I think one of though I'm born into a Theravada family and lived in Sri Lanka for many years, and now here in UK, I have been practicing with Ajahn Sumedho for the last 26 years.
I am a great fan. I have all his books, and actually, I wanted to tell a story of Ajahn Sumedho. So you obviously go to Amaravati.
Yes.
I know Ajahn Amaro very well. I know him personally very well. And one of the points and this is interesting, if you look at Ajahn Sumedho's, one of his latest books, The Sound of Silence, there he talks about the Zen tradition and the koan, which I haven't touched on today, but I will touch on. Sorry.
Can I say, so he's, as you know, he's now back here in England. He came on the 2nd, and he has now given 2 reflections. He gives these reflections from emptiness. That's all he talks about.
Yes,
all his talks on
absolutely.
that. Right. And Ajahn Asoka directs him. And do you know, his last talk was exactly what you gave us today. So I thought, where is this difference between Zen Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, right? Because Ajahn Sumedho is 100% Theravada, and that's what he wrote. And he called it directional signs pointing to what made one to see suffering or something. Exactly what you said. And the exact 3 points which you said, all the points you said is included in that talk, right? Yeah. And I was just thinking, they're all just one and the same. And just one thing about the opening of the heart. For me, I've always told Bhante that, right? Whenever I write back the feedback, that is the most crucial thing. How has your heart opened out with this? All these texts we read and we learn and learn, right? What are they for? They're all in the mind. It does nothing to the heart.
Absolutely.
It's when you listen and you were saying, so, but the only thing that he said a little different to you was, you speak about pariyatti, the study, and you speak about the patipada, the practice. And he also speaks about the practice that you're talking of meditation, but the yoniso manasikara, the reflection, and he had the Pali stanza which he said for being in the present moment, right? So that's the most important. He also said all the things what you say, that we are always looking, must go and get jhanas, must go and do samadhi, must go and do abhidhamma or whatever, read all the suttas, right, all the nikayas. But he said, no, it's in the moment, just being with the feeling in the heart to see whether do you like this or don't you like this? Am I getting what you want? And it's in being in that and realizing what that, and seeing the rising and the passing of it, the vipassana of it, that the heart opens petal by petal, these 5 things. But what he said, you said about the pariyatti but you didn't talk about the 3rd thing. He says pativedi, the actual realization. So you have the study, and then you have the practice, but you have the 3rd thing, which is called the pativedi. And that's the actual realization. When you are in the present moment, and when you are in being and not doing, and when you actually see that unsatisfaction of washing the cups or not doing this or not getting this or what you've forgotten. And then when you see it, and then after some time don't get involved with the sankharas and the thoughts, and then after some it goes, then the realization of the rising and the passing away, petal by petal it falls, and you haven't done anything. And that's when realization, and that's when the pativedi comes. So I just want to tell you that it was like listening to Ajahn Sumedho again today. And I
Thank you. I'm incredibly grateful. You've compared me with the great man. He's one of my teachers. No, he's one of my teachers, and I really appreciate. As I said, I have every single publication by the great. He used to come to the Buddhist Society summer schools. Him and my teacher were very good friends.
In Leicester, the summer school.
I'm also a great fan of Ajahn Chah, Sumedho's teacher. The great Ajahn Chah, and also Ajahn Mahabua. In fact, Bhante, I was going to mention 1 or 2 stories. One of the stories that I wanted to mention from Ajahn Sumedho was this thing that we think when we come to Buddhism is going to solve all our problems, and I want peace and quiet. And I remember when he was a young monk, he'd just been in Thailand 3 or 4 years, and a lot of Westerns were coming to his teacher's monastery, and he was entrusted to teach the Westerners, and he didn't like it, and he wanted to go off. He had heard about this tranquil island but he had this lovely cave and he could practice all alone in this beautiful surrounding scenery. And he was really, excited about it. And he said, I had a big thing. I wanted to be in solitude and peace. I wanted to be a hermit. And then he goes, guess what happened? On the way, I got to the island. There was a beautiful cave on the top of the mountain. But as I was climbing, I slipped and I fractured my leg. And then I didn't get to stay in that beautiful island at all. And then he goes, I had to go back to the monastery, and my teacher gave me the same roles that I had to do. So yes, thank you. Yes, I think obviously the great Ajahn Sumedho is incredibly senior to me, and he does speak totally from that empty heart, from the fully realized heart. In my case, I would like to say I'm still very much a student and a trainee. So that's what my talk concentrates on us trainees and how we can be helped by the teachings. But thank you. What you've said is absolutely true, and I'm very grateful for you bringing your point out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a talk, which I really enjoyed, straight from your heart to mine. Thank you. And thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante, for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, dear. Udayan, a question before we move on to Padma has asked, is the clearing of the heart same as the clearing of the mind?
Heart and mind are, mind is a Western construct, and the original Sanskrit word chitta has emotional connotations. So when we look at the word chitta and the Japanese word shin, in the East, we always include the emotional side as well as the rational intellectual side. So we prefer to use the term heart rather than the mind. Because if we use the word mind, it can become intellectual, and it almost gives the impression that I rationally, and this is the point that Dil mentioned just now, that it's not all in the mind and it's not in the heart. The reason we like to prefer the word heart, because it includes the emotions, the passions, and those are the ones, the real culprits, because in cold blood, we're all lovely people, aren't we? But you do something to offend me, and then we shall see what kind of a person I am. In Zen Buddhism, we have this wonderful description called the bull herding pictures, the ox herding, which I'll come to in another. And there, the heart is referred to as the bull, with a primitive energy that is within us. So yes, heart is a more appropriate general term. When we use the word mind, we use it more specifically for mental, rational thoughts, opinions, ideas, prejudices. But clearly, a lot of the times, our prejudices are predicated upon our passions. So if, for instance, I start talking about something that has some special relevance to you, Bhante, or somebody else, we all know what our bugbears are, don't we? Although we can start off the conversation in cold blood and quite rationally, suddenly, and my teacher said this, it's worth tape recording yourself, because what started off as a gentle, amicable discussion at some point suddenly crosses a certain threshold, and it becomes more than passionate. It becomes something else. There is a fire behind my conviction, and why aren't you agreeing with me? Hence, it is better to use the word heart, because the heart has that connotation of the emotions, the passions, and it's the passions that take us over. We say in colloquial English, don't we? I don't know what came over me. Oh my gosh, something came over and took me all over, don't we? And that's what the emotions do. That's not the thoughts and opinions. So.
Talking about emotions, Neha is asking Udayan, any tips on how to control the passing of feelings and emotions, specifically anger, frustration? Any tips, Udayan, from the Zen tradition?
So the first thing obviously has got to be awareness. Yeah, if you're so carried away with anger and you're actually striking with the hand, hopefully at least we don't strike with the hand. Yeah, you know what I mean? Some people are so angry, they do violent things, don't they? Their anger is so extreme. I hope most of us are not in that sad position. With us, it's controlling the tongue. We lash out with our speech. Why did you say that? Oh, you're wrong. The tone of the voice, the muscle tone, the butterflies in the tummy. Those are the signs that you detect before you get to that. So the first thing is, as I said in the talk, the very big fires will not be tackled at all until we deal with the tiny little fires of daily life resistance. So to answer your question precisely, anger is rising. I'm in a team meeting. Some buffoon is saying something pathetic, which is clearly not on. And this buffoon is trying to contradict me. And I'm not having it. I'm getting angry. I can pick up the signs. So if the awareness is there, that's a good first stop. Now, awareness on its own isn't going to do the business because it depends on the charge behind the anger. Sometimes we have little bits of anger, irritabilities, irksomenesses, and we can deal with it. But sometimes, if it's one of my very major resistance points, my teacher used to say, if the resistor is a massive one, then, it's going to be a massive anger. So in that case, there's not an awful lot we can do. It comes and it will improve with practice. What do we do? My teacher used to say, precious, fold hands, deep breath in, because the body will contain that negative energy. A deep breath, so that we make physically ourselves as big as possible so that energy can be contained. We mustn't dissipate that energy. We don't lash out. We don't hit somebody. We don't swear at somebody. At the same time, we don't repress it. We don't pretend it's not there. You can't do that anyway. You will only do one of two things: lash out, project it onto someone, or repress it and project it inwards into myself. Or there is a third type, which is called the slow hissing discharge, where you go into endless thought streams and repetition. How could he do this to me? After all these years I've served him, he said this to me, he's so rude, blah, 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 blah. So back to the anger. What do we do? Make yourself big, physically swell the tummy. And hands joined. Precious energy has arisen. Precious fire has arisen. Burn me away. Burn me away. That energy is the only thing that has inroad into this big monster called I. Nothing will deal with that I. That energy was there way before I and my latest development. See, we human beings, we come from the reptiles and mammalians. We share with our warm-blooded animals the same passion. And it came biologically, evolutionarily, it came from the fight or flight response. Back in the days, life was precarious. You went out to hunt, any moment you could die. Therefore, we have been biologically programmed to react to anything threatening. Yes? Because if we don't, we can die. Of course, we don't meet a jungle across the we don't meet a lion across the Broadway, do we? We meet other kinds of emotional stress, psychological stress, being bullied at work, or not being validated. We all like to be validated, don't we? I mean, the nature of I is to flow away like a balloon and bulge, and any little thing that pricks that balloon and deflates me, of course I don't like it. And that's what actually makes me angry. I'm angry because somebody has done something that doesn't agree with me. If, however, I lived in the state of anatta, then I'll see these are all phenomena. These things come to be, they pass to be, and the world doesn't run according to my wishes. I'm not the hub of the universe, but clearly I'm not there yet. And because I am there, my teacher used to say like this: I and fear are two sides of the same hand. So the anger arises because I am there. However, when we empty the heart over a long period of training, gradually these angry outbursts will go. They won't go in one go. That's ridiculous to expect that. So at that moment, if the anger is detected in the first place, and before you realize you're angry, you'll actually see your fists are clenching, your muscle tone is increasing, you're sweating, your heart rate is increasing, your shoulders are a bit clenched, butterflies in your tummy, you're pressing down on the ground with your feet. These are the bodily signals that come first. Training with the body, and in Zen, we hear a lot about training with the body. You learn to pick up the warning signs in the body. A bit like if I tell you to pinch yourself now. Pinch yourself now. You don't have to tell yourself there is pain. Before the idea there is pain, It registers automatically. Likewise with the body. So at that moment, we make ourselves big, and we actually, perhaps not in public, we go into our room, our sacred space in front of the altar. We sit there and we stew in it. And sometimes I have stewed for an hour and it doesn't go away, clenched teeth. And sometimes you get upset with the Buddhism itself. But I really have to show that person. She's taking the mickey. She thinks I'm a doorman. I am going to, and all this, and all this time, the fires are burning. You know, if the fire is really burning, it's not something you can do in cold blood. Oh, precious fire, go away, burn me away. Oh, no, no, no. It's clenched feet, it's sweating, tears streaming down. It's painful. But before we get to the big fires, let's start with the little ones, you know, the daily resistances, you know. It's Saturday, you're about to go out, the phone rings, the boss rings, and you don't want to take that. And that little, oh God, what is it now? That kind of resistance. Does that help, I hope?
Neha, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And it's so comforting to know that you go through this for hours some days too. So thank you for sharing.
Yes, we do. And you know, it's not wrong to have anger, Neha, because sometimes anger can be put to good use. It's the context. If there's social injustice, yeah. I'm reminded of the Buddha. I mean, there were times when he was there. And the classic example I also can give, especially to people in the West. I mean, Jesus, when he went to the Temple of Jerusalem and he saw the moneylenders there, he was angry. He kicked their tables. So that is a different kind of anger. Question is this, so when you see people suffering, when you see the poor being oppressed or whatever religious injustices all around the world, a little bit of anger is helpful, because otherwise we become callous, we become aloof. But as long as that anger is self-directed, usually we get angry is because my way has been crossed. Yes, even at a simple level. Do you know what I mean? Like the story I mentioned about the glass of water by the door. You know, it's nothing too profound. And yet, you know, a simple little trivial thing, my way has been crossed and I get angry. That's a different kind of anger. So we all go through it, and it does take many years of study and practice but it does improve, because you'll notice, you know, if truly given into the practice as suggested with a reputable teacher in a traditional training school, things improve, and you'll know that people at work are respecting you more, people at home, your friends are asking you for advice, and you know, and you don't realize it at the time, but maybe after 3, 4, 5 years you think, oh my gosh, how would I have reacted to that 5 years ago? A bit like our samurai monk. How would I have reacted? And I see it in myself. I remember when I was younger, 20 odd years ago, at work, you know, if anybody challenged my opinion, you know, I'm the consultant, you know, all this kind of arrogance. You know, nowadays it happens less. You know, there's nothing to be afraid of. You're entitled to challenge my opinion. You have every right to, you know, you might even help me. So that's what I decided the other day when the bosses were telling me to do something that I really didn't want to do it. Do you know what I said to myself? I said, who am I to think I know everything? Maybe she's got a point. Maybe my senior manager has got a point. Let me just go along with it. And as soon as that thought came to me, all the anger and hurt went straight away. And at that point, I bowed to the Buddha and I said, thank you, Lord. That's the practice.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We have a question about the present moment. So it is from, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name not correctly, but it's Imtuki. Excellent talk with it. The idea of being present in the moment is very interesting. Do we get to a state when we get to this rather than ruminating, etc.?
Yeah. Hi, Udayan. Hi.
Hi, Max. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I really enjoyed the talk. Yeah, I think you answered the question, really. I think your examples of what we do at work and how we ruminate and everything. And I've been in that situation myself. I mean, I still get into that situation.
Of course, we all do.
And I think being present in the moment is a very, very interesting concept. But I think what interests me, there was a term you used about getting into a state where we are present in the moment more. And we let go of that rumination, and we let go of those defense mechanisms, and we get to a point where, you know, we are comfortable in our own skin.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of talk, and early Zen specifically, it was all about no thinking, and that's too one-sided.
Yeah.
There must be some thinking, Max, because at work something happens.
Yeah.
Unless you are a master already, they say the master leaves no traces. Well, sadly for me, I'm clearly not there yet. I need more work to be done, and I think most of us are in that position. And we're learning every day anyway, aren't we?
Yeah.
Well, actually, there are times when one does have to think about the situation at hand, and one does have to analyze it, but in a dispassionate, clear manner. And this is why in Buddhism we have the symbol of the moon, which is the cool, clear, dispassionate thinking knowledge. But to dwell on it and to get, you know, when you dwell on it, you know it because you're hot internally.
Oh yeah.
You're angry and it's unpleasant and it does nobody anything, does it? It doesn't. It actually causes you more stress. It will give you ulcers. It will give you all kinds of ailments. It will give you skin problems, all this stress. Whereas if we just let go of it, you know, it doesn't mean, you know, we're not thinking about it. We still have to think, you know, what am I going to do with it tomorrow, and etc. But it's in a calm, dispassionate, clear-headed manner, rather than that fire that rages.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. So do we have any other questions? Yes, Dill, we have time for a quick question.
Now this is, you were referring, somebody asked a question about the mind and the heart. I'm a pediatrician and you're like a psycho, so being a medical background, we know that the latest research has shown that there are cardiac sensory neurites, and so really the mind is not only in the brain here, but it's also with your heart, and there are much more messages that are sent from the heart to the brain than the other airborne.
Absolutely.
So the lead is always the heart, but it's just that people have got used to the brain being there.
I think that's, thank you, Neil. Thank you. It's very, very helpful suggestion. That's very good. Absolutely. It's good there are two doctors in the house, at least here. Good. The other thing I would say is this mind-body split that we have in the West, we don't have it in the East. It is one entity. For the purposes of analysis, and when we talk about the five skandhas, the five aggregates, we break it down. But in truth, that is just a provisional training teaching point. There is no such, because it is all one unified whole. And ultimately, beyond that, there is also, when we approach that supreme state, and we all have, we do actually, the boundary between myself and others sometimes is eliminated, because usually it's all just about me and what's in it for me. But quite often, and even people who don't practice any tradition, they do selfless actions all the time. And we see it all around the world, people acting selflessly and thinking of others before that. And I think that's what the training is ultimately about. It's more than those philosophical debates, because philosophers, they'll always debate and argue. I think ultimately it is about the practice and nodding and bowing of the head, and and realizing there is this beautiful, wonderful, grand thing far greater than I. And we marvel at the mystery of being, we marvel at the awe of it all, and we share the joy, and joyful service to others actually brings joy to ourselves. And that's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama keeps on going on and on about. He said, I'm not talking about religion, I'm not talking about Buddhism, I'm simply talking about kindness and compassion. And I think that's the real message of the training, because to put away this obsession with myself, and actually this obsession with myself doesn't bring any peace, because all it does, it gives me more stress, and I have to defend my position, I'm insecure. I don't need that. If we let go of that, actually it becomes a lot easier, and others see it as well, and that is the true ahimsa, the harmlessness, the non-violence. The true ahimsa is actually compassion, isn't it? Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Dill, and thank you, Dr. Udayan.
Thank you for inviting me, Bante.
our session today. And today, I mean, it is a special day for the Dhamma Center as well, because today is the 1-year anniversary of the Dhamma Center.
Congratulations! You've done a very good job, Bhante. So I'm very impressed.
All of us,
Very impressed.
a lot of the people who are here today, and actually we had another session in the morning. We've had good support for 1 year, and I'm happy that we are also starting off our Zen classes today, which will be held every month on the last Saturday of the month. So next month on March as well, we'll be having the Zen class on the 27th, where we hopefully will have another eminent teacher joining us. We are not going to spill the name as yet, but we'll have another really good teacher joining us for next month's session. And I think it also did surprise some of our Theravada students who, which we have a lot of, that we had a Zen class. And I did see that some of them had unsubscribed from the Dhamma Center when I sent the Zen email out. And that is quite a shame.
Where is the oneness? The oneness of the teaching.
Yes.
That is a shame. That is a shame. That is a shame.
Quite a shame. And I think Bhikkhu Analeo, who is a very prominent Theravada scholar, recently put out a book about the ego of traditions and how it hinders the path towards Nibbana. And I think it is very important, because the Buddha was a fearless man. If we are strong with our doctrines and our practice, we have nothing to fear. And I think as a Buddhist monk, I am even willing to sort of read the Quran or any other spiritual text.
Yes.
If I feel like I'm going to get something out of it. And I think that is the whole blessing of this practice.
Absolutely.
The essence of our practice.
Andre, I mean, I'll just have to say, it is so important what you've just touched on, and we see this a lot. And, we must show that, amongst us Buddhists, there are no divisions. This interdenominational pride and arrogance, it has haunted the Zen tradition, it haunts all the traditions. It is really not on. Of course, we stick to one tradition, but psychology, for instance, can help. As the doctor has just said, a lot of the modern research and neuroplasticity and compassion and meditation, it all helps. It's all knowledge. It's our duty, because the truth is infinite in its manifestation. It's like a mountain. You can approach a mountain from any side. And from this side, the mountain will look different. From this side, it's the same mountain. When you get to the top, it's the same mountain. But of course, there's so many different routes of entry. And today, this route might help me. Tomorrow, that route might help me. For instance, some of my biggest insights I've had have been from the Theravada tradition, actually. Some of the things that Ajahn Sumedho and Mahabua, Ajahn Moon, some of my favorites, Moon, Mahabua, Cha, Sumedho, Amaro, all these guys, Sister Sundara, Sister Kandasera, they're all wonderful people, and they have wonderful things to offer. And by actually us blocking ourselves away from these great masters, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. But there are people with different views, and the world is a wide open place, Bhante.
Absolutely. And I'm glad. Thank you then for coming, accepting our invitation, being a part of us, and of course, being a part of the trustees and supporting the Dhamma Center so much. Thank you everyone else for joining the session today. Hopefully you will also join our next session on the 27th of March. And we are looking forward to continuing to explore the different traditions, continue to explore different ways of practice, and the dues of wisdom that we can sort of grasp from people and traditions all around. Thank you again, Udayan. Take care. And
I'll just say a big thank you from all of us to Bhante for doing all this. We wouldn't be here without Bhante. And can we also wish him the best of luck? And can we also wish that this center goes on and on for a long time to come. We wish Bhante and the center the best wishes for this on this anniversary day, Bhante. It's a lovely sunny day. We've been blessed with a sunny day. I hope it's sunny in Colchester, Bhante.
Very much.
Thank you to Bhante as well for organizing this and doing such hard work, doing it all basically single-handed. So thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you from all of us.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good